Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Marisa Lagos, filling in for Thuy Vu this week. Coming up on our program, yesterday lawmakers in Sacramento narrowly approved a costly and controversial plan to repair the state's aging roads and bridges. And we talked to Steve Lee, the first Hmong-American to be elected mayor of a U.S. city. Plus, musician Chuck Prophet joins us in studio to perform a song from his latest album, which he describes as California Noir. But first, as part of our ongoing coverage of the first 100 days of the Trump administration, yesterday, President Trump authorized a missile strike against Syria in retaliation for its alleged use of chemical weapons against civilians. And today, the U.S. Senate confirmed Neil Gorsuch as the next Supreme Court justice with a simple majority vote. Republican senators invoke the so-called nuclear option to lower the vote threshold and defeat a filibuster mounted by Senate Democrats. Joining me now to discuss these legal issues and more is John Yoo, a UC Berkeley law professor. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Marisa.
So the president ordered a missile strike Thursday on Syria, and he did it without clearing it through the UN Security Council or through Congress. We've seen a lot of response in the last day. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi called the attack proportional, but she also joined more liberal and conservative members of Congress, including East Bay Congresswoman Barbara Lee, in calling for a congressional vote. You're a constitutional scholar. I mean, is what the president did legal under U.S. or international law?
So let's take the Constitution first. So presidents have long used force abroad without getting a declaration of war from Congress. In fact, we haven't declared war since World War II. Wow. But there have been wars like Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, where Congress passed a law supporting the president. That said, a lot of these kinds of strikes, which don't involve a full, big commitment of troops, have often been done by presidents before for a long time without any kind of congressional permission. However, a lot of presidents, I think, want to have a show of political support from Congress. And so it may behoove Trump to go back and ask Congress to show some kind of support for the action. The other thing worth pointing out is this is an odd place where the far left and the far right meet. So you have Rand Paul and Barbara Lee both calling for a congressional vote. Yeah, so it sounds like there's not going to be any
impact on Trump, whether or not it's technically legal under the Constitution. What about under the UN and the rules under international law?
So this is an area that's developing in international law. There's a big argument about whether you can use force to try to stop the proliferation of or use of weapons of mass destruction. It's been a big project for many American administrations and many countries around the world to enforce a ban against the use of chemical weapons, particularly kinds like the sarin nerve gas is one of the most dangerous agents known to man. On the other hand, there are countries like China, Russia, and a lot of other countries that say countries cannot use force against the sovereign independence of another nation without an actual declaration by the UN Security Council. But again, presidents and countries have commonly used force. Think about all the strikes we had against Iraq before the Iraq invasion to try to stop countries from acquiring and using weapons of mass destruction.
So you mentioned China and Russia, and I know you've been pretty concerned watching this Russian election story unfold. Do you think this changes anything in your mind with that or with our relationship with Russia?
Well, the interesting thing is, and we talked about this at the Commonwealth Club a few weeks ago, the idea that Russia is trying to influence our elections I think is the story of the Trump administration so far. The interesting thing about Syria is that's introducing a divide between Russia and Trump or the United States. This is an area where we just attacked with cruise missiles, 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles, the ally of Russia, at an air base and a target where there were Russian personnel. And we had to call them ahead of time and say, you might want to move your people off the base we're about to attack. And as you may know, the Russians just declared they're no longer cooperating with us in Syria to make sure our forces don't come into conflict. So despite all the things we're hearing about Trump and the Russians, and when it comes down to real politics, you're seeing a split now between us and Russia.
Things probably look a little different in the Oval Office than they do on the campaign trail.
Trump's no longer Trump. You Rosetta Stone to practice Russian.
Yeah, exactly. So the other big news today, which we would have led with had there not been this attack, is that we have a new Supreme Court justice after about a year of an empty seat. Justice Neil Gorsuch was approved this morning on a nearly party line vote. I'm curious what you think his appointment will do to the court, particularly with cases like, say, the California Teachers Association case that's been pending and that they couldn't come to a resolution last year because of Antonin Scalia's death.
Yeah. So, as you know, the nuclear option, I thought we were talking about Gorsuch, not Syria. But with this nuclear option, as you know, Gorsuch was confirmed today because the Republicans got rid of the filibuster in the Senate for Supreme Court nominees. I think actually Gorsuch will not change the court at all because he's only replacing another conservative, Justice Scalia. So you mentioned what we call the Friedrich case, the case about can unions take money from employees and use it for political speech. If Scalia had been on the court, I think the California Teachers Union would have lost. I think most observers agree with that. I think Gorsuch isn't going to change that outcome very much. It's really the next seat. And I think that's kind of what you saw with the big controversy and the fighting over the filibuster. Both sides are flexing their muscles to show when the next seat comes open, which really will determine the court's course on abortion, gay marriage, things like that. They're both showing we're really going to go to the mat, and here's what we're willing to do. You saw kind of a test run of what's going to happen for the next vacancy. But Gorsuch just replacing Scalia is not going to change that much.
Do you think Trump will get another appointment to the Supreme Court?
Depends whether he gets reelected. So there's a lot of factors. But you know, several of the justices, as we've discussed before, are quite elderly. And it would be, if Trump were to win, I can't imagine he wouldn't get 2 more appointments. If Trump is just going to be a one-term president, he may still get 1 more, and that will be the crucial seat for the future of the court.
It'll be interesting. Well, before I let you go, I know that what you are known for is being author of what's known sort of colloquially as the torture memos under the George Bush administration.
I got to tell you, I didn't put those at the top of the memo, believe it or not.
I know you didn't, and I went back and read it, and it struck me how much it was really a dispassionate legal argument. So I'm curious, like, being in Berkeley, a hotbed of liberalism, I mean, what do you think people most misunderstand about your role or position in that?
So I think a lot of people, it's not just this question, but a lot of questions think that when lawyers give their advice about what the law says, that they are telling you to do it or not do it. And I think what we were doing in the Justice Department, and it's the same questions are coming up, I'm sure, today with the Trump administration and Syria and a lot of things we talked about, is a law, to me, sets the boundaries of the playing field. Doesn't tell you what plays that you have to call. That's why we elect presidents, and that's why they pick secretaries of state and secretaries of defense. I think the hard question is, the law may tell you, cabin what you can do. You still have to decide the policy. And I think people often misunderstand that when lawyers, say Gorsuch says, you know, it's not important. I'm not telling you whether I'm for abortion or not for abortion. I'm just telling you what the law permits the decision makers to decide. That's what I thought we were doing too. On the other hand, it would be really strange if I lived in Berkeley and people were not upset about the things that I did, or even that I'm a Republican. I always say, but don't worry, the other 99.9% of the Berkeley faculty have got the Democratic Party covered. You don't have to get upset that there's 1 more Republican on the campus.
Do you think torture is ethical or just legally justifiable?
So I think that what we're doing is saying that the federal statutes on torture said that you can't do certain things in interrogation of al-Qaeda suspects, al-Qaeda leaders, 3 of them is what we're talking about. And in that playing field, you still have to decide what you want to do. And so we're saying you can't go across these lines, then you will be torturing people. But what is not torture is undefined in the law.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in, John Yoo.
Thanks, Marissa.
Yesterday, state lawmakers narrowly passed a massive and costly transportation bill to fix the state's aging roads and bridges. Governor Jerry Brown championed the legislation to raise more than $50 billion through new vehicle registration fees and higher fuel taxes. Because of the tax hikes, a 2/3 majority was needed in both the California Senate and Assembly. I'm joined now by KQED's Dan Brekke. Thanks for coming in, Dan.
Oh, anytime.
So before we get into the details of this legislation, lay out the need here. Why are we in this situation?
Well, California, like most of the rest of the 50 states, has underinvested in infrastructure it already has. And this is familiar to anybody who's been driving on Bay Area or California roads this winter. Potholes are the norm. Big potholes are even more the norm. And so the state has what it estimates is a $59 billion unmet need for just repairing what it has now and investing in new stuff that will strengthen the current road and highway and bridge network. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Local governments are supposed to have a $78 billion shortfall that they're looking for ways to pay for too.
So this is not going to get to all of that, but it is a start. Tell me what this giant bill does and how it's split among locals and the state.
Well, it's a 50-50 split between local governments and the state. So of that $52 million, it's split evenly down the middle. About a total of $30 billion of that money is going to go toward what they call fix-it-first projects, which means get to those potholes, get to the bad pavement. When there are bridges that are in dire need of repair, go and get those right away. The rest of the money is going to a variety of sort of incentive projects or and corridors where there's a dire need for for work right away, or where projects are underway. So there's one provision in here where there's a because work is already ongoing for the Caltrain project on the peninsula to electrify it. Some of this money actually that the legislature just passed could go to help them.
Interesting. So let's get into the politics here. The governor had to cut some deals to get all the votes, and some of it was to appease outside interests like the trucking industry, and some of it was to get lawmakers on board, including one Republican in the Senate. Tell us about this behind-the-scenes politicking.
Well, listen, I just wrote a little piece on this that you can find online called "How They Made the Sausage," and it's not. I mean, some of it is just old-fashioned politics. The trucking industry is going to have to pay a lot of money. Diesel fuel taxes are going to go up 20 cents a gallon. Their sales tax that's applied on top of the regular state sales tax is going to go up a lot. And so to sweeten the pot, they did something that's very unpopular with environmentalists, that the legislature did something that's unpopular with environmentalists. They basically cut a deal that ensures that trucks that currently meet the state air pollution regulations can stay on the road for the next 18 years.
Wow.
And so that's a big deal in that sector. For the legislators, I mean, they have people who are in a tough position. The Republicans were united against this, but there was one who was on the fence and was willing to go along if he got a little something. And that was Senator Anthony Cannella, who's from Stanislaus County in the San Joaquin Valley. And what the governor and the legislative leaders did for him was give him $400 million to extend the Altamont Corridor Express train commuting service, which goes from the Central Valley into San Jose. So that's a big win for him. He's also getting $100 million to build a new road from UC Merced to Highway 99. And then for a couple of on-the-fence Democrats down in Riverside County, there was a similar deal to provide funds in the range of $427 million to fund a bunch of big projects they have down there.
So those are all transportation projects. They're not unrelated.
Exactly. They didn't say they didn't create a Jelly Belly research facility.
So when will we start seeing smoother roads, and when will this hit our pocketbooks?
Well, the money is going to start being collected by the 1st of July, I believe, and you always want to know when the roads are going to be smoother. Unfortunately, there is so much work to be done. I think the effect is going to be very gradual. Okay. But the promise is that work, this is going to, $5 billion a year is going to be coming in, and the work is promised to begin immediately.
Great, and we'll see gas hikes, I think, starting in December.
I
think by the end of the year, we've heard
by the end of the year.
Yeah. So before I let you go quickly, I want to ask you about another story you've been covering. We got some big news this morning on the drought. Tell me about that.
The governor lifted his drought emergency order that was imposed about 3 years ago. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that we're not in a drought. I have a rain gauge at home in Berkeley. We're pushing 40 inches right now, which is 16 inches over normal. But I think this is an acknowledgement that the situation has changed. And although there's also an acknowledgement that the crisis could come back and it's not really over. There's drinking water provisions still in place for several counties in Central California.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
You're welcome.
Roughly 20 miles south of Sacramento is the city of Elk Grove. Last November, it made history by electing as mayor the first Hmong-American to lead a U.S. city. Thuy Vu is out today, but earlier she spoke with Elk Grove Mayor Steve Lee.
Mayor Steve Lee, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, your campaign for mayor was followed by Hmong worldwide, and have you heard from them since you were elected?
I have. And, you know, folks from all over the world were sending me emails, phone calls. I had correspondence from Australia, France, Canada.
Well, tell us a little bit about Elk Grove.
It is a bedroom community. It is very diverse. We have a nice breakdown. In fact, our school district has 88 different languages that are spoken in it. It's heavy Asian Pacific Islander, Latinos, African American.
The Elk Grove mayor's job pays a whopping $9,500 a year.
It's very lucrative, yes.
I can see why you went after that job. Your day job is the juvenile hall counselor. What made you want to become mayor?
You know, I started out in this business as an activist, and I remember going straight out of college, and I looked in Sacramento, and I saw that there was a tremendous need for advocates in the community. When I stepped up and started organizing the Hmong community and the Southeast Asian community in general, I learned something, and that is, if you keep organizing, they'll keep calling on you to organize. I hit a sort of a barrier as an activist, and that's when I realized that I had really had to run for public office. Is we went before the Sacramento City Council, asked for police officers that can actually speak multiple languages to make that a priority. The answer that I got from that city council at that time wasn't supportive, and that was the moment in which I thought, you know, I've been organizing the community long enough. What would it be like if I was in the position where I made decisions prior to seeing the policies? And so that was it.
And you're one of 6 children in your family. You're
Right.
the only one who went into politics. How did that come about?
You know, it came about, my father, being the strong Asian father, forced me to watch news. I remember arguing with him, and I said, Dad, this doesn't make any sense. You know, I am a 6th grader. I don't know why I'm watching this. But that sort of rubbed off onto me, and I remember it was important that Robert Matsui at that time was our congressman, and he had a hand in it as well. And so that really is inspiring, to see an Asian American be a congressman and to see him step up to help other Asian Americans so that they can become citizens. It was profound for me, and it made an impression.
And your family history, speaking of your father, is rather interesting. Your father fought in the CIA secret war against communism.
My father's job was to rescue American pilots in northern Laos. And so what would happen is during the bombing runs, if a pilot was shot down, they'll fly over to northern Laos and parachute out. That's at the point where my father and his team goes in and try to recover that body. The sad part is at the end of the war, we were on a must-kill list, and so we had no choice but to flee Laos.
What role do you think your personal narrative plays in how you can perform your role as mayor?
The theme yesterday at the State of the City was about diversity. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to remind people that every American has a story, and we all come to America and we add to it. During the campaign, there was a lot of negative campaigning, and when I won, I was sent letters that told me to go home, refugee. I took that and I thought about it, and I said, you know, part of my job is to remind everyone that we are a nation of immigrants. We all came from somewhere else, and to stand by those that are being victimized. I think that that's my role, not only in the city of Elk Grove, but in the entire state and the entire nation. Wherever there may be trouble, I would be happy to stand by those who are victimized.
And does that include perhaps having sanctuary city status? Is Elk Grove a sanctuary city?
We haven't explored that, you know, and that's certainly.
Are you planning to as mayor?
That's a conversation that we probably need to have, because I would love to make rules by myself as the mayor, but I work with a team of council members.
Regarding local politics in Elk Grove, the Native American tribe Wilton Rancheria is proposing a casino resort in your area, as you well know. It's very controversial. You have been accused of flip-flopping on it. I
moved into Elk Grove because I love the community, love the safe neighborhoods. I didn't move because I knew that 18 years down the line there was going to be a casino possibly coming to Elk Grove. That being the case, as a father, I don't support gambling. I don't want my boys growing up around casinos and gambling. But as a member of the council, as the mayor, this is an opportunity to bring 2,000 permanent jobs with the Rancheria, 2,000 construction jobs. And this is a project that can probably jumpstart the abandoned mall that we have in Elk Grove. It's 6,000 jobs altogether. So
what are you saying now, as mayor, you do support it, or you do not?
I've set my personal feelings aside, and yes, I did support the development.
Well, we appreciate your spending some time with us.
Thank you, ma'am. Pleasure to be here.
San Francisco rock and roll musician Chuck Prophet has been entertaining audiences for decades. He's been on the road recently to promote a new album, Bobby Fuller Died for Your Sins, which he describes as California noir. The new song spans a range of themes, from pop culture to religion to gun violence. Joining me now is singer-songwriter Chuck Prophet. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you've described this album as California noir. Tell me a little bit about that. What's the story you're telling here?
Jim Thompson, actually, the great noir writer, said that, when they asked him how he wrote so many books, he said, well, it's easy. There's a million stories to tell, but there's only one plot, and that's that things are never what they seem. So I think that California, being the Golden State, is a place that people come from all over the world, and sometimes, the reality they find is totally out of joint with the dream. And if you're a songwriter, that's just raw meat for me.
Yeah. Well, you're a San Franciscan. I mean, you grew up here, right? And you have lived here for decades. I mean, how did the city sort of help influence this album?
Well, it's a city at war with itself in many ways. I mean, we're going through a lot of changes, and it's become kind of startup city USA, and you can't help but take that in.
Yeah. Have you seen, changes that have really impacted you and sort of the way you interact with the city?
Well, I live in the Castro, and I've always kept a little office space. More like a kind of an overpriced shoebox in the South of Market area. And I walk through Civic Center every day. And I've seen, since Twitter came in, and I've seen the changes, and that, we're lucky there isn't a Saks Fifth Avenue down there at the moment, So I'd like to see more mid-level retail and stuff that serves the community a little more.
Well, on this album you end with a song about Alex Nieto, who was shot and killed by Bernal Heights by police a few years back. And I read you talking about how you're not sort of a political person, but I feel like that's an inherently political issue.
Well, I wasn't really that aware until the civil trial, and then I got really, that's when I got wound up, and I did co-write the song called Alex Nieto with my friend Kurt Lipschutz, and we really didn't have any plans, and this is a song that we wish we didn't have to write, but we just got fired up one day and started talking about the civil case where a jury of non-San Franciscans decided that these 4 cops didn't use excessive force after firing at him like 50 some odd times. So it was a song that, like I said, I wish we didn't have to write. And for those that don't know, Alex Nieto was a 28-year-old guy that grew up in the Bernal Heights neighborhood. He had a job as a bouncer at a club. He was wearing a taser that he wore for his job, got into some kind of altercation with somebody new to the neighborhood, somebody in the tech industry. And that led to a misunderstanding and a text that said there's a guy up there, he's a gang member, I guess, because if you're not sensitive to San Francisco and you don't know what's going on, you might profile somebody in a 49ers jacket as being in a gang. And cops came on the scene, and whatever happened, but he's a guy that didn't deserve to die. And some people will build a case. Rebecca Solnit, who you're probably aware of, built a very strong case that his death was a direct result of gentrification.
Do you feel like it's been hard for people to stay in the city because of all these changes?
Yeah, well, the money's come to town, and these things happen. I mean, it's become like London or New York, where only the rich need apply.
Is that good for music or bad, though?
I think it's bad for music, because for me, running a band, I've always been able to work with musicians that sort of operate on the fringes.
Right.
And, so a lot of these guys have been pushed out of the city, but we're still living in a place where people are incredibly inventive, and they got 17 roommates, and they got an 8-track tape recorder in the closet, and they're making records. And so, I'm still encouraged and inspired by things that go on as well.
Thanks so much for joining us, Chuck Prophet. A quick note about next week's show. Instead of our regular programming, we'll be airing a special about Bay Area arts. To take us out tonight, here's A Bad Year for Rock and Roll from Chuck Prophet. I'm Marisa Lagos. Good night. Take it away, Chuck.
Well, the thin white Duke took a final bow. There's one more star in the heavens now. The moon won't rise, the sun won't set. There's so many things I would rather forget, but I'm all dressed up in my mohair suit, watching Peter Sellers. I'm thinking of you, I'm wondering where it's all gonna end. It's been a bad year for rock and roll. It's been a bad year. A bad year for rock and roll. I wanna go out, but I'll probably stay home. Now, what you gonna do when your bird won't sing? You tried and you tried everything. What you gonna do when your last friend's gone? You're still at the bar, but they've all moved on. I can see it in your eyes. It's not too late. We don't have to die to reach a better place. Man, I really hope that's true. It's been a bad year for rock and roll. It's been a bad year. A bad year for rock and roll. I wanna go out, but I'll probably stay home. It's been a bad year for rock and roll. It's been a bad year. A bad year for rock and roll. It's been a bad year.